may as well get to it, Scott.
Yeah.
Many of us thought, and we had heard reported by, your colleague Paul Friesen and Mike and Marat, that there'd be a meeting happening last weekend for Barry Trotz. Heck, I went up to Clear Lake. I was on a high alert if I needed to run up to Dauphin for any sort of video or fun making. It didn't happen. It sounds like it's happening this week. What's your take on the lay of the land right now with the Winnipeg Jets coaching search, Barry Trotz's situation, and a number of the other jobs that you would have thought Trotz would have been a candidate for already being filled?
Yeah, well, first off, that weekend meeting was solid. I know that I've seen a lot of chatter. Well, why did Mike report that, or Paul
push
or
back.
Marat or whatever? It did, right? I mean, that's just the truth of it. Barry is taking this slowly. Some would say methodically. So that's just the way it is right now. I mean, there was a report last week that Barry's going to have to July 1st. That's kind of his own deadline to make a decision, and so. The lay of the land here is the Jets are all in on this. We know that. It's very obvious. The second meeting is I believe the only other team. There hasn't been another team so far with the second meeting with Barry Trotz. The offer needs to probably be a little bit better from the Jets. But I think that there's a little bit of, I don't know necessarily there's a lot of hesitation on both sides. I think the hesitation on Barry's side is, does he want to do this again, right? Does he want to do the grind of another NHL season? We look at 60 years old and we don't think that it's very old, but, Barry's been doing this for a long time. The grind is long. I mean, you can play up to 100 games, a season. If you go far in the playoffs, add in your preseason games, all the travel, all that stuff. So I think part of the apprehension, perhaps on Barry's side, just from people I've spoken with, is just, does he want to do the grind or does he want to take a year off? Let's not forget, he will get paid $4 million from the New York Islanders, whatever way he goes. So, that's part of the process. I mean, here's a guy who gets an opportunity to take a break that he might not have, he wouldn't have had if he didn't get fired. So that's on the table. I'm not entirely sure if there's apprehension on the Jets side. We've heard about roster control and all that. I was speaking with an assistant coach today in the NHL, just asking about context about when it comes to roster control and what that really means, right? I mean, do coaches have that? Do some coaches have more of it than others? And, what I was told was, at least when Paul Maurice was here in the NHL, or in Winnipeg, roster control, it was a collaborative effort, right? The one thing that was said to me was that NHL head coaches are oftentimes the best scouts, right? These are the guys that know what fits in their roster because they're so in tune with what they have. They're always talking. The communication is constant between coach and GM. We heard during the Paul Maurice era and especially later on that potentially there was some friction between, Kevin Cheveldayoff and Paul Maurice when it came to some of the younger guys. I believe that was true. There was a little bit of friction there between, why were certain guys not playing? Has that really come up in the interview process with Barry Trotz? I'm unsure of that. I mean, I think we know what Barry Trotz is about. He wants guys to play a certain system. He wants guys to play that system hard. It's methodical. That's the way that Barry Trotz plays. And so he needs guys that fit that system. Is that going to include a complete roster overhaul? I'm not entirely certain of that. But I do think that Barry Trotz would want to make some changes to the roster, just like any coach would, right? You're not coming in here as a Stanley Cup winning head coach and being treated like a rookie head coach. Barry Trotz is going to have ideas. And so I think for Barry, at least just speaking from Barry's side, from what I've, heard, I think a lot of it's just him trying to figure out, because I don't think that there's any issue with the management thing. I think his best way, other than maybe potentially Nashville coming in and doing something, his best way to a managerial role is in Winnipeg. I think there's room for that. I've heard, we've all heard a lot of things, but, there's potential one day that Kevin Cheveldayoff could just move into the president of hockey ops, and maybe Barry could be the GM, sort of like how it happened in Vegas when Kelly McCrimmon came in. And pushed, and I forget the guy's name right now, but it is
George McPhee.
George McPhee, that's it. I was thinking Pat McPhee for a second, and it's not. So yeah, and just something like that. But again, this is all just a lot of talk. There's been so much speculation around this. One thing about the Jets, notoriously tight-lipped. The hatches have been battened down at this time. Nobody's talking in the organization, obviously. But to me, and this has always been the case with Jets, when that happens, that's when the going is getting very serious. And I think the Jets are relishing this chance to talk to Barry again and put their best foot forward. And that's all they can do. And people are going to say, well, potentially there's this maybe the Jets just aren't making the best offer. I think all this rests on Barry Trotz. Does Barry Trotz want to coach or not? And I honestly think it's Winnipeg or bust at this point. We common sense might even say that as well, just because all the teams that have gone by. But Barry's turned down at least Philadelphia, and if not others, just not even interviewing with the likes of potentially Dallas or Detroit or whatever. There's opportunity for Barry Trotz, and he could have been in a lot of different places. But it's come down to what it appears to be, and what I've been told is Winnipeg or bust. And so, we'll see where it goes from there. And maybe it might not even be about the offer that the Jets give. It's just what Barry wants to do. And so, I think the Jets play a huge role, though, however, in enticing Barry Trotz to come and coach what is essentially his hometown team. Because there's a lot that comes with that, and it's more, obviously there's all these offers, little brown jugs.
Free beer, we
right?
know that's what's coming.
We've seen all these things, right? But this is a very personal decision for Barry Trotz that has a lot of ramifications for his future, and he's been asked to do it in a let's say relatively short timeline in the grand scheme of things. But he's doing it. He's doing this by the beat of his own drum, and that's just the way it's going to be. And people need to kind of just be content with that, I suppose, even though it's difficult to be, because you have one of the premier coaches, one of the best coaches of all time. If you look at, the record books in terms of wins and where he stands in that list and all that stuff. So obviously there is definitely anticipation from fans and a lot of people in this province. Make no mistake about that. But again, I think this rests a lot on Barry Trotz.
By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you hit that thumbs up. And if you haven't hit the red subscribe button, please do so. Well, no, for sure it does. And I'll say this, and it was interesting to see, the reports from the Sun and the Freep and the Athletic. I mean, all sort of getting a heads up that meeting was planned for this weekend, and they were circling back. And listen, I understand why that would get out there, because I think that, well, first of all, with other jobs being filled, there was a question of what's happening with Winnipeg. And listen, to their credit, they've been criticized at times for being too patient or too loyal on things. I think in this case, it's the reason why they are where they are right now, because Barry Trotz, I think, was pretty clear right out of the get-go that this wasn't going to be a snap decision and just immediately jump into something else. He was going to, evaluate the landscape of the job market, what was out there for him, each situation, what it meant for him, absolutely what it meant for his family. And I mean, we as hockey fans don't talk enough about that, but I mean, certainly he's got, a son with Down syndrome. I'm sure support for him is a very, very important decision in what he makes. And, you got to make sure first and foremost that you're taking care of yourself and your family first. And that makes a whole lot of sense. The fact that the Jets have been able to be so patient, and the fact that this is happening right now, has done one thing. And I'll say this as someone that right from the get-go, even before Barry Trotz was fired, and always saying that's the dream guy to come back here for so many more reasons, and we don't need to rehash all of that. But the fact of the matter is that the Winnipeg Jets, I think, have done everything that they can. Elliot Friedman has reported that money will not be an issue. Yep. So it's about, can they put a situation that gets one of the winningest coaches in NHL history back here to Winnipeg to take over the club. And, listen, if it doesn't happen, I don't think fans will have much to complain about, other than maybe they didn't read the tea leaves early enough that it wasn't happening and went in another direction. Sure. But listen, you want the best guy for the job. They're doing everything they can to get that. And, hopefully we'll have some clarity on this maybe later on this week as to how things went, or early next week. And as I said, Pierre LeBrun reporting that the July 1st was sort of the date that he thinks Barry Trotz will make that decision in and around, which would be the end of next week. Listen, I think the Jets can live with that as well. I mean, I think they would have talked about enough things as far as how they would be working together. And listen, this second meeting could be like, I would imagine a lot of the things that Barry Trotz needed to know, he already knows. It's about getting together and, okay, if we're doing this, how are we moving forward? And then it gets to the roster and personnel and those sort of the influence in decisions. And the one thing that you don't want, Scott, is to have a guy coming in as the head coach that does things one way and has a particular mindset and, theory, I guess, on putting a team together, and a disconnect with the guy that's making the decisions and bringing the players in. And I would have a feeling that that's a big, big part of it as well. Let me ask you this. If Barry Trotz is the head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, do you think that affects significantly the amount of player movement this summer? Or is that something that it's more a wait and see once you get to the season with the players and personnel that the Winnipeg Jets have right now?
I would imagine that during the interview process, and maybe this happens in the second one, that Barry would lay out kind of how he would do things, and there would be either a ballpark kind of idea, a broad scope, or Barry might have a good idea on what he would want to do. Does he want to trade Mark Scheifele? Can he rehabilitate Mark Scheifele? Would Mark Scheifele play under him, the way that he wants to? I don't think Barry is oblivious to this roster, and he's just going to come in and then sort it out. I think he knows very well what this roster has and what he can do. I think there would be, I don't know what significant changes. I think, but if Mark Scheifele's moved, that is a significant change that constitutes significant changes in this roster. So yes, I think that's a big deal for Barry Trotz, especially if you're managerial minded, right? I mean, that's where I could see some butting of the heads. But again, I believe that is always a collaborative effort within teams. It's not. Barry Trotz isn't, let's say, Kirk Muller or one of these other guys who's kind of new to head coaching, right? Where you would maybe defer to the GM or you might whatever. Barry Trotz knows how to put a stamp on a roster, and he knows what he needs. And I think there would be then the conversation of, can the Winnipeg Jets get Barry what he needs? How long is it going to take to mold that roster into what Barry Trotz wants it to look like? And that sort of thing. So, is it going to take a couple of years? Are the Jets a contender next season if Barry can, if the Jets and Kevin Cheveldayoff and all that can figure out how to retool the roster on the fly and get it done? I think there's also a race against time here too, because there is still a window, I believe, for this Winnipeg Jets team to do something significant, because they do have these, they have a world-class goaltender. They have a world-class scorer on the team. They have two world-class centers, right? There are, and then you have, guys like Nikolai Ehlers, who is an elite, in my opinion, analytical kind of forward that is coveted by a lot of teams. He does a lot of good things on the team. Maybe one area for Barry Trotz, though, is going to be what's going to happen on defense. You have all these players, they didn't mesh. But again, part of this whole thing with Barry Trotz is that his systems are very defensively minded. And I wonder too, and nobody said this to me, it's just my own kind of thought, is what does that mean for the hockey? Because Barry Trotz's hockey, you watch the New York Islanders, they're exciting when they play in Nassau, because it's exciting in Nassau when they did play there. But it's not an exciting brand of hockey to watch necessarily. It's effective, it wins games. It can win Stanley Cups, as we've seen with Barry, in Washington there. It's not always the most effective, the most exciting brand of hockey. But I don't think that plays any part in what Mark Chipman or Cheveldayoff or anybody like that
they want to win.
Think.
They want to win.
And
period.
winning puts butts in the seats. And this is the other thing with Barry, for the Jets, and I would completely understand why they're all in on this, because Barry Trotz kind of erased his last season. You hire Barry Trotz, and this is not by means just a PR move. I don't think that the Winnipeg Jets are doing this. This isn't a smokescreen for something, or just hey, we did this. Look at us, we went for it. No, I think they're doing this because they want Barry Trotz. But there's so much on the line here for the Jets that they got to get it right. And I think that at the end of the day is that if you have to give up a certain amount of whatever to Barry, you need to be able to be willing to do that because of everything that he brings to this franchise. And we could be talking Barry Trotz up and he's a complete flop too. Nobody really talks about that either. It just may not work here. But we haven't really seen that in Barry Trotz's career. Where he goes, he wins.
He's got a pretty long resume of winning everywhere he's gone. And listen, what he did in Nashville was unique because you're starting with an expansion team and you're slowly building up to where it was when he ended up leaving.
Yeah.
And then in Washington, a lot of people had thought that they'd blown their opportunity the previous years when they had these monster seasons and had fallen short in the playoffs. And then they finally get to it. I think the example, the more recent example of what he did in New York is what entices and excites people the most, in that he took a team that couldn't play a lick of defense and turned them into the best defensive team.
Right, worst to first,
first season he was on the bench. And that, of course, was after Tavares left. So you're talking about, a very different club. I do wonder how some players on the Jets roster would fit into a Barry Trotz system and what that might do to them. But I think what you want to have, we all saw what these players had to say. Well, not all of them, but most of them at the end of last season. And it seemed like they wanted that accountability. They wanted to be part of a team that, would maybe sacrifice some of the personal for team game. That is what Barry Trotz's game is all about. And, you're exactly right. Off the ice, I mean, the confidence I think that it would reinstill in a lot of fans that maybe have been on the fence after last season, the fact that the organization would be able to get a guy like that to come in and take over, I think immediately makes up a lot of the erosion that you were sort of referring to in the last season.
Oh, that's what I'm saying, right? What is this? What is one of the downfalls of this team, or perceptions of this team? It's that they can't land the big free agents. They can't land, the superstar players in trades. They're not on, they're on a lot of players no trade lists or no movement, whatever it might be. All of that stuff, right? And then you go out and you add, I think that's why the Jets have been told. But one of the reasons why the Jets are so into this is because it changes the perception of this franchise, right? And it's not because you got a big name player, but you got one of the premier head coaches that had the lay of the land, right? Could have gone to Vegas, could have gone to Philly, probably could have gone to Detroit or maybe Boston or any of these teams, right? I think if he would have shown interest, he obviously did in Philly. But again, he turned down Philadelphia too. That's a huge market, when you go there. That's a massive market. You want to be the next Fred Shero in Philadelphia. You want to be the guy that leads the Philadelphia Flyers to Stanley Cups, right? So I think, again, it's a massive thing for this team to do. And I think, a lot of people criticize this team for a lot of things. I've done quite a bit of criticizing myself. But I think what they're doing here is exactly what you'd want to see as a fan, that they're going after the biggest dog available and they're all in on it. And if they end up not getting him, I don't think it's for lack of trying. I don't believe it's for lack of, financial incentive for Barry Trotz or anything like that. It would be a massive disappointment, I think, for everybody involved if it doesn't happen. But to see the Jets do this is a bit of I don't want to say it's a shift in their mentality or whatever, but I think they are also learning from last season. It got bad, so bad that they couldn't control the narrative anymore. Because the players just wouldn't allow it. The players are like, it doesn't matter. I will still always refer to Kyle Connor. It was put on a tee by Mike Mac. This is a knock against Mike McIntyre. Mike asked the question in a certain way because it was told to us that Kyle Connor was going to walk back some of his comments. What did Kyle Connor do? He ran straight back into the fire.
Down.
And exactly, he doused the fire again with gasoline. And so, but that is an embarrassment for this franchise. The last season was embarrassing for this franchise. And I think they've learned from that. And that's why they're going after Barry Trotz. And we've heard about Jim Montgomery and all these other coaches, but they're not Barry Trotz. And I think this team knows that they have a bit of an inside edge on him. I think we already seen that. It's already come down to that. And where it is, in my opinion, Winnipeg or bust. And what I've heard, Winnipeg or bust. So I think the Jets have done exactly what they needed to do to get into this position. Now the biggest thing is, and always the biggest thing is sealing the deal, getting his pen, Barry a pen in his hand and signing a contract with this team. and then going from there. And that's what this week or whenever it's going to be, based on all these different reports and everything we're here and whatever, that's what it's going to really come down to. Can they incentivize Barry Trotz enough to put pen to paper?
And make him believe that this is the situation, that he can succeed, and it makes sense for him, for his family going forward. And there's a lot to that, and it does take a while, more so here in Winnipeg than probably in a lot of other spots. I'll say this, there's no guarantees that this happens, far from it. But if it doesn't, and I don't really want to spend too much time talking about this because I think everyone knows I'm quite invested in this and would love to see this happen, because I think it would be great for the team. I think it would be great for the city. I think it would be great for the fan base. But if it doesn't, the one thing I'll give True North credit for, from what we know, is that they have done everything they can to make this happen. And as I said, there's no guarantees. If they are not able to make it happen, what would have been unforgivable is just saying, you know what, Barry's going to cost too much. We're going in a different direction or something like that. And they have not done that at all. We hope it'll end the way most Jet fans want it, and apparently the organization does. But if not, I think they've got a good leg to stand on moving forward. And you know, they've obviously done some due diligence on some other quality candidates who would be, you know, absolutely worthy of taking the job, but just don't have a Stanley Cup ring and the spot in the NHL all-time wins list that Barry Trotz does. So we'll find out more about this going forward. Just very quickly on this, if it doesn't work out with Trotz, who would you put a nickel on as being the guy? Is it Jim Montgomery? Is he a clear number 2 from what you're hearing? Or is there a number of players? It would essentially be going back to the start of a smaller group and whittling it down from there in a much quicker time period than they've done with option A.
Yeah, I think Jim Montgomery's up there, of course. I mean, we've heard that. I've heard that. You know, it's something. I mean, I think they think highly of Jim Montgomery. He's been through a lot. You know, I don't know how that whole story unfolds with him in Dallas. Does he still need to answer for that a little bit more? You know, that I guess that gets decided if the Jets do hire him and that sort of thing. But at the same time, I mean, he was molding a Dallas team into a good team. And I think that's part of what I think they like about Jim Montgomery is he brings, you know, maybe some fresh ideas to behind the bench. And that sort of thing. So there's that. I think they've kicked tires on other guys too. Kirk Muller is one of them. You know, Derek Lalonde's still in the playoffs. I'm not sure how much that's been done yet with him.
I think that, I mean, from all accounts, and we were talking to Pooley yesterday about this. Yeah. The fact that the Detroit situation has been so quiet, and Steve Yzerman has the obvious ties to Tampa. I mean. If I was a betting man, I am a betting man. And if I had the opportunity to put a nickel down that one of the most likely Lalonde, but one of the assistants from Tampa is the next guy in in Detroit, I would certainly do that going forward, which sort of leaves us the situation that we're in right now with Trotz and the Winnipeg Jets.